A desert is the last place you would look for a lost city, yet entire empires once bloomed in these arid lands, their secret hidden not in gold, but in water. Ancient engineers performed what seems like magic, turning dust into life with systems of breathtaking ingenuity. By the end of this exploration, you will see our current global water challenges in a completely new light. We will descend into inverted temples built around wells and walk across stone rivers suspended in air. How did cultures without modern tools achieve such impossible feats? And why did some of these brilliant systems ultimately vanish? The answers lie in forgotten blueprints that mastered the art of conjuring life from stone and sand. What does it mean for a civilization to build its dream upon a single, precious drop? The sun does not simply shine here, it consumes. It bakes the ground into cracked clay and turns the air into a shimmering wall of heat. Rain, when it comes, is a fleeting, furious visitor, often arriving in torrents that the parched earth cannot absorb. For a community trying to plant roots in such a place, this was not a landscape to be tamed, but a relentless equation to be solved. Survival itself was measured in drops. This fundamental truth meant that water management was never just an engineering project. It was the very architecture of civilization. Every choice, from where to build a home to how to organize a society, orbited this single, precious resource. Consider the fundamental problems these ancient planners faced. First, evaporation. A reservoir under that relentless sun would vanish into the sky almost as quickly as it was filled. Then, the erratic nature of rainfall itself. You could not rely on gentle, consistent showers. You had to prepare for long droughts broken by sudden, devastating floods that could wash away an entire season's work in an hour. And finally, the silent threat of salinity. In arid regions, when irrigation water evaporates, it leaves behind salts that poison the soil, slowly turning fertile fields into barren crust. A society that failed to solve even one of these puzzles was not merely inconvenienced, it was doomed. This pressure forged a unique kind of knowledge. Long before modern hydrology, cultures like the Nabateans in their rose-red city of Petra, or the meticulous planners of the Indus Valley cities like Mohenjo-Daro, became expert readers of the land. They learned to predict where water would flow underground by observing the types of plants that grew, or the way certain rocks were shaped by ancient streams. They understood watersheds and groundwater recharge cycles not as abstract concepts, but as sacred geography. Their maps were not drawn on parchment, but etched into the very placement of their temples, their granaries, and their homes. Water dictated hierarchy, with control over its distribution often centralizing power. It spurred cooperation on a massive scale, as maintaining miles of canals or terraces required a unified, organized labor force. To build in the desert was to engage in a constant, profound conversation with an invisible, life-giving force. What does it mean to anchor your entire dream for the future on something so essential and yet so elusive? The answer would be written not in law but in stone, in a series of breathtaking innovations that began with a simple, revolutionary idea. Instead of chasing distant rivers, they would make the rain come to them. Beneath the blistering surface, a cooler, more patient logic was at work. The first great marvel of ancient water management was not a dam or a reservoir you could see, but a hidden river, coaxed from the heart of a mountain and guided silently for miles. This was the Qanat, a masterpiece of subterranean engineering born in ancient Persia over 3,000 years ago. Its genius was in its simplicity and profound understanding of the land. Picture a line of circular openings like a string of beads laid across a desert plain. These are not wells but ventilation and access shafts. they descend, one after another, connecting to a gently sloping tunnel far below. This tunnel begins deep within a mountain foothill, where it taps into a water-bearing layer of rock and gravel, an aquifer fed by distant rainfall or melting snow. From there, relying solely on the unerring pull of gravity, the channel carries its cool, fresh bounty downhill, sometimes for over 30 miles, emerging finally into sunlight at a settlement or an oasis garden. The construction of a Qanat was a monumental communal effort, a project that could take years and define a community for generations. It began with the Mukani, the Qanat diggers, who were part engineer, part diviner. They had to identify a viable aquifer in the mountains, then calculate a precise, gentle slope for the tunnel. Too steep, and the water would rush through and erode the walls. Too shallow, and the flow would stall. The digging itself was a dangerous, meticulous process. Teams worked from the destination point backward, digging the mother well at the mountain source first to confirm the water was there, then carving the underground channel toward it. The vertical shafts were dug every 60 to 100 feet to remove excavated material and provide air to the diggers far below. The result was a self-regulating system. Because the water flowed underground, it was shielded from the evaporating sun. Because it emerged at a lower elevation, it could be distributed to fields and homes without need for pumps. The Qanat did not fight the desert, it negotiated with it. The legacy of this technology is etched into the landscape and culture of entire regions. In the city of Gonabad in Iran, a Qanat system known as Kasebe, dating back over 2,500 years, still provides water for agriculture today. This was not a static invention, it was a revolutionary idea that traveled. Along the Silk Road, the knowledge of Qanat construction spread from Persia to the Arabian Peninsula, where in Oman they are known as a flage, to North Africa, and even as far east as Western China. Wherever it went, it transformed the possible. Settlements could flourish far from major rivers. Date palm groves and vineyards bloomed in the dust. The Qanat became more than infrastructure. It was the lifeblood of cities, dictating social structure. Maintaining the long, shared tunnel required cooperation and clear rules, often administered by a water judge. It represented a profound pact between a community and its hidden resource. How do you build an empire? You begin by learning to whisper to the mountain and convince it to share its secret, one steady, underground stream at a time. Yet for all its brilliance, the Qanat had a limitation. It could only bring water to where gravity allowed it to go. What if you needed to lift that water, to defy gravity itself and bring life to a higher plane? That challenge would lead to another, even more elegant invention, one that turned the very act of drawing water into a dance with balance. The solution to lifting water was not found in a complex machine, but in a profound act of reverence. Across the arid plains of the Indian subcontinent, communities did not simply dig wells, they carved cathedrals into the earth. These are the stepwells, known as bayoles or valves, and they represent one of history's most breathtaking unions of architecture and hydrology. To approach one is to encounter a mystery. Instead of a simple hole in the ground, you find a grand, ornate gateway. A wide staircase beckons you downward, flanked by symmetrical colonnades and terraced galleries that descend story after story, deep into the cool, dark earth. This was not a hidden system like the Qanat, but a celebrated public space, an inverted temple built around a sacred resource. Their primary function was brilliantly practical, masterfully adapted to the region's intense climate. The Indian monsoon delivers its life-giving rains in a concentrated, powerful burst. A simple well could not capture the torrent, and surface reservoirs would evaporate quickly. The stepwell solved this. Its vast step design created a massive catchment area. As the rains fell, water would cascade down the tiers, filling the deep central reservoir to its capacity. The sheer volume and depth of the structure, combined with the shade provided by its own architecture, minimized evaporation, preserving the precious water through the long, dry months that followed. But the genius of the stepwell was its multidimensional purpose. It was a civic center, a place of respite from the heat where people, especially women who traditionally collected water, could gather, socialize, and rest in the cooler subterranean levels. It was a spiritual sanctuary, its walls adorned with exquisite carvings of deities, mythological scenes, and geometric patterns, transforming the act of drawing water into a devotional journey. Every architectural element served a dual role. The pillared pavilions provided shade and structural support for the excavated earth. The staggered staircases and landings ensured access to the water even as its level fluctuated dramatically between seasons. Some featured ingenious water-drawing mechanisms like pulleys mounted in upper pavilions. One of the most magnificent examples is Rani Kai Vav, the Queen's Stepwell in Gujarat. Built in the 11th century, it is a masterpiece of the Maru Gurjara architectural style. It descends over 100 feet through 7 levels of galleries, lined with more than 500 principal sculptures and 1,000 minor ones depicting Hindu cosmology. It is not merely a well, it is a subterranean palace dedicated to water, a testament to the cultural capital invested in this essential resource. This answers a profound question about these societies. For them, water management was never a grim, purely technical struggle. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life, spirituality, and art. To build a stepwell was to celebrate the source of life itself, to create beauty around necessity. It reflected a worldview where the functional and the divine were inseparable. What does it mean to build with such intention? It means the act of survival is also an act of culture, leaving behind not just utility but legacy carved in stone. Yet, even these architectural wonders were bound to the land's surface. What if the challenge was to cross a great distance, to defy not just gravity but terrain itself, carrying water across a chasm or a valley? This would demand an invention of a different scale, one that seemed to make stone rivers flow through the air. Stone rivers flowed through the air, defying valleys and distance with a serene, monumental grace. While the Qanat whispered beneath the earth and the stepwell celebrated water in a sacred space, the Roman Empire declared its mastery over water with an unmistakable public roar. The aqueduct was not merely infrastructure, it was imperial will made physical, a statement carved in stone across the landscape. Its purpose was audaciously simple: to capture water from a pristine, distant source, often a spring in the hills, and deliver it by gravity alone into the heart of a thirsty city. The challenge was one of breathtaking precision over staggering distances. To maintain a steady, gentle flow, Roman engineers designed these channels with an almost imperceptible slope, sometimes as little as a few centimeters for every meter of length. This gradient had to be maintained perfectly across 50 kilometers or more, through hills, across plains, and over deep river valleys. The iconic arched arcades we picture today, like the magnificent Pont du Gard in southern France, were actually only a small fraction of the total system. They were brilliant solutions for crossing low points, but most of an aqueduct's path was a modest channel cut into a hillside, or a tunnel bored straight through a mountain. The true genius lay in the invisible work, the meticulous planning that preceded the first stone. Teams of surveyors, using instruments like the chorobates, a long water-level table, mapped the route with astonishing accuracy. They selected springs not just for volume but for purity and reliability, and they developed a special waterproof mortar called opus signinum, a mix of lime and crushed pottery, to line the interior channel and prevent precious water from seeping away. Once this engineered river reached the city walls, its journey was carefully managed. The water flowed into a distribution tank called a castellum divisorium. Here, the main flow was divided through lead or ceramic pipes to various public endpoints, a system of ancient plumbing that prioritized public health and civic pride. Water gushed into public fountains, providing free access for all citizens. It supplied the vast communal baths, centers of hygiene, socialization, and culture. It flushed out sewers, improving urban sanitation. The aqueduct did not just bring water, it brought a new standard of living, transforming Rome and cities across the empire into places of unprecedented public luxury and order. This centralized, monumental approach speaks volumes about Roman values. The aqueduct was a supreme display of administrative power, technical skill, and resources. It demonstrated the empire's ability to reshape geography to serve human need on a colossal scale. Building and maintaining such systems required vast wealth, organized labor, and long-term stability, hallmarks of the Pax Romana. The aqueduct was more than a utility. It was a symbol of civilization itself, a promise of order and abundance imposed upon the natural world. It asked a profound question of its citizens. What does it mean to live in a place where fresh, clean water flows not from a local well, but from a mountain spring 50 kilometers away, delivered by the unwavering hand of the state? This vision of control was powerful, but it was also fragile. For all their grandeur, these stone rivers depended on a stable, centralized authority to maintain their flow. What happens when that authority falters or when the climate itself begins to shift? The greatest test for any water system is not its creation, but its endurance across centuries of change. The grandeur of stone aqueducts speaks of conquering nature, but true resilience often lies in a quieter, more adaptive harmony. Far from the deserts of Persia and the forums of Rome, in the high valley of Mexico, another civilization faced a seemingly impossible agricultural challenge. They did not find dry earth but a vast, shallow lake surrounded by marshes. The Aztecs, upon founding their great city of Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco, looked upon this waterlogged landscape and saw not an obstacle but a canvas. Their solution was the chinampa, often called a floating garden, though that name is a poetic simplification. These were not free drifting rafts, but meticulously crafted artificial islands, permanent fixtures of incredible fertility that turned a lake into a breadbasket. The construction was a masterclass in sustainable engineering. First, stakes were driven into the shallow lakebed to mark a rectangular plot. Inside this frame, layers of material were built up, a lasagna of sustainability. They wove a base of reeds and aquatic plants, then piled on rich mud dredged from the lake bottom. The key ingredient was a layer of decaying vegetation and organic waste, which would compost slowly, releasing heat and nutrients. This process was repeated until the plot stood just above the waterline, anchored by willow trees planted around the edges whose roots would knit the structure firmly into place. The result was a network of fertile plots separated by narrow, navigable canals. This created a self-sustaining ecosystem. The canal water provided constant, capillary irrigation to the chinampa beds, eliminating the need for manual watering. Aquatic life in the canals thrived, and the nutrient-rich muck dredged during maintenance was continuously recycled onto the gardens as fertilizer. The Aztecs practiced a brilliant polyculture, growing maize, beans, and squash together on the same plot. The maize stalks provided a structure for the bean vines to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil to nourish the maize, and the broad squash leaves spread across the ground, suppressing weeds and retaining moisture. This was agriculture as a closed loop, a symbiotic dance with the wetland environment. The productivity was staggering. Some historians suggest a single chinampa plot could yield up to 7 harvests a year of various crops. This system fed the immense population of Tenochtitlan, a city of perhaps 200,000 people at its height, all sustained by the creative use of a once marginal landscape. The chinampa teaches a profound lesson in innovation. It did not seek to drain the lake or radically alter the hydrology. Instead, it worked within the given conditions, leveraging the very water that seemed a limitation to create a new form of fertile land. It was an exercise in observation and mimicry, building upon the natural processes of a wetland to achieve an abundance that rivaled any irrigated field. This model of working with nature rather than imposing a rigid order upon it stands in quiet contrast to the monumental waterworks of other empires. It asks us to consider a different kind of power, not the power to redirect a river across miles, but the power to understand a local ecosystem so intimately that you can persuade it to produce life in unexpected, abundant ways. Yet for all their ingenuity, even the most brilliant water systems are not immortal. They exist in a delicate balance with the societies that build them and the climate that sustains them. What happens when that balance is lost, when the careful conversation with water breaks down into silence? The desert does not surrender its secrets easily. In the rose-red city of Petra, carved from the very cliffs of southern Jordan, the Nabateans performed what might be the ultimate act of hydrological persuasion. They were a nomadic people who transformed into master builders, not by diverting a great river, but by becoming virtuosos of the desert's own brief, violent song, the flash flood. Their entire civilization was built on a simple, radical premise to catch every single drop before it could vanish. Walking through the narrow, towering gorge known as the Sick, the main entrance to Petra, you are walking through the heart of their hydraulic machine. The cliffs here are not merely beautiful, they are functional. Carved channels run along the walls at shoulder height, sometimes splitting into smaller conduits. Terracotta pipes were embedded within the rock. The entire canyon was engineered to be a spillway, capturing the torrential runoff from the plateau above during rare storms. But the true stroke of genius sits at the very head of the Sick. Here, the Nabateans built a monumental diversion dam, crafted from stone and sealed with waterproof mortar. Its purpose was not to create a lake but to perform a delicate operation. When a flash flood roared down the main valley toward the narrow entrance, this dam would intercept the furious flow. It would then redirect a controlled portion of the water into a carved tunnel, a man-made channel that ran alongside the Sick, safely delivering the life-giving resource into the city's heart, while the destructive force of the flood was shunted away through a separate, natural wadi. This was floodwater tamed and invited in for tea. Within the city itself, the system grew even more intricate. They lined natural rock cisterns with a special silicon-based plaster, a nanotechnology of its day, to prevent precious water from seeping back into the thirsty stone. They built massive underground reservoirs and linked them with a network of channels and pipes that fed public fountains, bathhouses, and even lush private gardens. Archaeologists have found evidence of pressurized pipe systems that could have supplied second-story rooms. This was not mere survival engineering, it was the infrastructure of luxury and commerce. Petra thrived as a caravan hub precisely because it could offer what no other desert stop could: guaranteed water. Travelers and traders crossing the harsh routes from Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean would find not just a safe haven, but a place of abundance with public pools and reliable supplies, all paid for by the taxes and trade that this very water enabled. So how did a nomadic people develop such sophisticated, sedentary engineering? Their genius was one of profound observation and adaptation. Their ancestral knowledge of desert survival taught them to read the landscape, to know where water would flow and where it could be trapped. When they settled Petra, they applied this intimate understanding on a grand, permanent scale. They did not import foreign techniques, they refined their own, carving prosperity directly from the rock they knew so well. Their system was a dialogue with the desert's extremes, a testament to the idea that resilience is not about overpowering nature, but about listening to it with exquisite care and then writing your response in stone and channel. Yet, listening is only the first step. The ultimate test for any civilization is whether it can hear the warnings, the subtle shifts in the very patterns it has come to depend upon. A channel carved in stone is inert without the human hands that maintain it, and the shared agreement that guides its use. The true engine of any ancient water system was not its physical form, but the invisible architecture of social organization built around it. Water management was at its core a profound exercise in sociology and governance. For a Qanat stretching 30 miles or an intricate network of canals feeding a city, the technology itself was only half the answer. The other half was a durable set of rules, roles, and relationships that could prevent conflict and ensure fair distribution across generations. Consider the sheer scale of communal effort. Building a single Qanat required years of coordinated labor from diggers, basket haulers, and surveyors. Maintaining it was a perpetual duty, requiring regular cleaning of the underground tunnel to prevent collapse or siltation, a dangerous task performed by specialized crews. This was not a project for an individual or even a single family. It demanded the commitment of an entire community or a patron with significant resources. To manage this, societies developed remarkably sophisticated legal and administrative frameworks. In the arid highlands of ancient Yemen, for instance, inscriptions detail complex water codes carved into stone. These laws specified exactly how much water each farmer was entitled to, based on the size of their land or their contribution to the system's upkeep. They outlined schedules for irrigation turns, often measured by the shadow of a mountain or the flow of a small marker channel, a primitive but effective form of timekeeping. Most tellingly, they established the role of the water judge or water master, an official entrusted with impartial authority to allocate rights, settle disputes, and enforce the rules. This figure appears across cultures, from the Marib of Persian Qanat systems to the Tukai Rikuk who oversaw Inca irrigation in the Andes. Their power was sacred and practical, a recognition that fairness was the only glue that could hold a shared resource together. This ethos of community-based management found one of its most enduring expressions in the acequia systems. Originating with the Moors in Spain and later brought to the American Southwest, an acequia is more than just an irrigation ditch. It is a democratic institution. The water it carries is considered a communal resource, not private property. Members of the Acequia Association, known as Partians, hold shares in the water itself. They gather regularly in meetings to vote on maintenance, elect a mayor domo to oversee daily operations, and collectively decide on water allocation, especially during times of scarcity. This system prioritizes the health of the entire watershed and the community's shared survival over individual maximization of gain. It represents a centuries-old model of participatory resource governance, one that has sustained agricultural communities through droughts and social change. The lesson here is stark and deeply relevant. A sustainable technology is ultimately futile without a sustainable society to care for it. The most brilliant engineering can be rendered useless by greed, neglect, or conflict. These ancient systems succeeded because they encoded cooperation into their very blueprint, creating social structures that mirrored the interconnectedness of the water network itself. They understood that managing a resource is fundamentally about managing human relationships, about building trust and shared purpose around a common lifeline. This raises a pressing question for our own time, as modern aquifers are depleted and rivers run dry. We possess advanced technology far beyond the stone tools of the past, but have we invested equally in the social innovation, the shared agreements and equitable governance required to steward our water for the long term? The silent collapse of a civilization often begins not with a broken canal, but with a broken covenant. The precision of these ancient works seems to defy their time. How could a Roman aqueduct maintain a perfect, gentle slope for 50 kilometers without a laser level or a global positioning satellite? The answer lies not in magic, but in a different kind of genius, one rooted in relentless observation and the refinement of simple tools into instruments of profound accuracy. Ancient hydrology was a science of the senses, a discipline built on reading the landscape as a living text. Consider the Roman engineer's toolkit. For long-distance surveying, they used the groma, a simple but effective cross-shaped device on a pole with plumb bobs hanging from each arm. By sighting along these weighted lines, they could establish perfect right angles and straight lines across vast distances, laying out the aqueduct's path. For the critical task of measuring a gentle slope, they relied on the chorobates, a wooden bench about 6 meters long with a carefully leveled trough carved along its top. By filling this trough with water and observing its perfectly flat surface, they could replicate a true horizontal line across uneven ground, checking the grade of their channel with remarkable consistency. The Roman architect Vitruvius, in his foundational work De Architectura, detailed these methods with systematic clarity. He wrote not just of tools but of principles, instructing engineers to seek the purest water sources, to line channels with special mortar, and to ventilate tunnels to prevent airlocks. This was not guesswork, it was codified, empirical knowledge passed down and improved upon. Half a world away, in the ancient kingdoms of Sri Lanka, engineers performed a different kind of calculation. To locate the ideal spots for their vast, rain-fed reservoirs called tanks, they became expert naturalists. They observed where certain moisture-loving plants thrived, indicating a high water table. They watched where elephants dug for water in the dry season, trusting the animals' innate knowledge. They studied the patterns of termite mounds, whose internal ventilation systems are exquisitely tuned to humidity, often signaling underground water sources. Their understanding of hydrology was woven into ecology. They built elaborate, interconnected systems of tanks and canals that captured monsoon rains, stored them, and released them for rice cultivation in a carefully timed cycle that sustained a dense population for over 1,000 years. This was large-scale water management guided by deep, generational intimacy with a specific place. Their methods extended to materials science as well. To test soil for lining a reservoir or canal, they might use a simple pot test, filling a clay shard with local soil and water to see how quickly it seeped through. They tracked the movements of stars and planets to develop sophisticated calendars, predicting seasonal rainfall and planning agricultural and hydraulic maintenance cycles around celestial patterns. This was proto-science in its purest form, a continuous loop of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and application. Their success was built on accumulated trial and error, on lessons learned from failures that were not discarded but studied. A canal that silted up too quickly taught them about gradient and water velocity. A reservoir that cracked taught them about soil composition and foundation preparation. This raises a quiet, provocative question for our own technologically saturated age. We can measure groundwater from space and model watersheds with supercomputers, tools of unimaginable power. But does this very power sometimes distance us from the physical reality of the resource? The ancient engineer felt the slope in their bones, tasted the soil, watched the bees and the roots of trees. Their technology was an extension of their senses, forcing a constant, direct conversation with the environment. Our technology often mediates that conversation, placing layers of data and screens between us and the water source. The lesson is not to abandon advanced tools, but to remember the foundational principle they all ultimately serve: attentive observation. The ancient world reminds us that before we can manage water, we must first learn to see it, to understand its language written in the land, the plants, and the sky. And sometimes the most critical data point is not from a satellite, but from the path an elephant chooses to walk at the end of a long dry season. This intimate knowledge allowed them to build systems in harmony with their world, but harmony is a fragile state, easily disrupted by forces both within and beyond human control. Two great rivers, the Nile and the Indus, gave birth to two of humanity's earliest civilizations. Yet the way these societies spoke to their life-giving waters could not have been more different, a testament to how environment directly forges the tools of survival. In Egypt, the Nile presented a rhythm as reliable as a heartbeat. Each year, the flood arrived, a predictable swell that deposited a fresh layer of fertile black silt across the floodplain. Egyptian ingenuity lay not in fighting this cycle, but in choreographing it. They developed a system called basin irrigation. They built low earthen walls to partition the land into large, shallow basins. When the flood came, they would guide the muddy water into these basins, where it would saturate the soil and settle its precious nutrient load. Then, just before the planting season, they would drain the excess water back into the receding river, leaving behind perfectly prepared, fertilized fields. This was a passive, elegant, and profoundly effective system that synchronized human activity with a natural calendar they could trust. It required maintenance, of course, dredging canals and repairing dikes, but its logic was one of harmony with a predictable partner. This relationship deeply influenced Egyptian culture and power structure. The central authority of the pharaoh was inextricably linked to this hydraulic order. It was the state that organized the labor for large-scale canal projects and the redistribution of grain from the fertile lands. Control of the water meant control of the food supply, reinforcing a powerful, centralized monarchy that saw itself as the steward of Mat, the cosmic order, which included the reliable flooding of the Nile itself. The river's consistency was mirrored in a social and political system built on long-term stability. Now, travel east to the Indus Valley. Here, the story is written not in grand state monuments to pharaohs, but in the quiet, meticulous order of a city street. The Indus River was far more volatile than the Nile, prone to unpredictable flooding and shifting its course. Faced with this capricious force, the people of cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa developed a strategy not of broad basin agriculture, but of defensive urban precision. Their genius is most visible in what they built beneath their feet. The cities were laid out on a precise grid pattern, with streets oriented to catch the prevailing winds for cooling. But below those streets ran a network of covered drainage channels, the world's first sophisticated urban sewer system. Individual homes had bathing areas and drains that fed into these larger, brick-lined conduits, which were equipped with manholes for maintenance. This was not about irrigation, but about resilience, about efficiently managing stormwater and waste to protect the urban fabric from both flood and illness. Their relationship with water was also one of direct access. The cities featured numerous deep, brick-lined wells, providing households with a reliable groundwater source independent of the river's mood swings. And then there is the enigmatic Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a large, waterproofed public tank that may have served ritual purification purposes. This focus on sanitation, groundwater, and public water architecture suggests a different kind of societal organization. There is little evidence of vast palaces or temples glorifying a single ruler. Instead, the uniformity of the brick sizes, the standardized city plans, and the impressive, functional public works imply a strong, municipally organized authority, one perhaps managed by a council of elders or a civic administration focused on collective urban welfare. The contrast is illuminating. Egypt's strategy was agricultural and cyclical, embracing the river's predictable gift. The Indus strategy was urban and protective, engineering a buffer against the river's unpredictability. One system centralized power in a divine king who embodied the cycle. The other may have distributed authority among a civic body that maintained the urban order. Both were spectacularly successful for centuries. This comparison shatters the idea of a single path to hydraulic civilization. It reveals that the blueprint for water management is not invented in a vacuum. It is a direct answer to the questions posed by a specific landscape. The river asks the question, and the society, through its technology and its social structure, writes the answer. It makes you wonder, in our own era of climate volatility, which ancient playbook are we reading from, and have we truly understood the questions our own environment is now asking us? A channel's flow was secured by more than just mortar and stone. It was held together by shared belief. Across countless cultures, water was never merely H2O. It was a divine essence, a living force with its own will and temperament. To manage it was to engage in a sacred dialogue, a ritual as important as any prayer. This spiritual dimension was not a separate layer added onto engineering. It was the very foundation that made large-scale, cooperative water management possible. By weaving hydrology into mythology, ancient societies created a powerful ideological framework, one that justified immense labor, enforced essential rules, and connected daily survival to the cosmos. Consider the pantheons. In Greece, Poseidon was not just god of the sea, but of springs and earthquakes, a volatile deity who could grant fresh water or shatter the land. In Mesoamerica, Tlaloc, the Aztec rain god, demanded reverence and offerings, his favor meaning the difference between abundance and famine. In the Vedic traditions of India, Varuna was the celestial keeper of the cosmic waters and the divine judge, embodying both the physical and moral order that water represented. These were not distant figures in stories, they were active participants in the hydrological cycle. Their worship translated abstract environmental processes into a narrative the entire community could understand and influence. This sacralization extended directly to the landscape itself. The source of a spring, the headwaters of a river, were often seen as portals to the divine, the dwelling places of nymphs or spirits. It was common practice to build temples or shrines at these very points. The Maya, for instance, revered cenotes, the deep natural sinkholes that provided access to the groundwater, as sacred wells and gateways to the underworld. They conducted ceremonies at their edges, offering precious objects to the gods below. Similarly, in India, the entire Ganges River is considered a goddess, Ganga, descended from heaven to purify the earth. Pilgrimages to bathe in her waters are acts of spiritual renewal, and cities along her banks are holy sites. This belief transformed the river from a resource into a consecrated entity, its protection a religious duty. This fusion of the sacred and the practical had profound social and political consequences. When a ruler embarked on a major hydraulic project, like digging a grand canal or consecrating a new reservoir, they were not just acting as an administrator, they were performing the role of a priest-king, an intermediary between the people and the water deities. Their authority was legitimized by this divine connection. The success of the project proved their favor with the gods, while its maintenance became a collective religious obligation. The annual opening of irrigation channels in many agricultural societies was accompanied by public festivals and rituals led by community elders or priests. These events synchronized human activity with the agricultural calendar, reinforced social cohesion, and celebrated the renewal of the life-giving flow. Perhaps most enduringly, these spiritual narratives encoded a powerful, pre-scientific conservation ethic. If a river is a goddess, you do not casually dump waste into her. If a spring is home to a nymph, polluting it is an act of sacrilege, inviting supernatural retribution. Taboos and customary laws, often framed as religious edicts, protected watersheds from overuse and contamination. Felling certain trees near a water source might be forbidden, as their roots were seen as holding the earth and the spirit in place. These were not environmental regulations in a modern sense, but they functioned in remarkably similar ways, leveraging the deep-seated power of belief to ensure sustainable practice across generations. The maintenance of a Qanat or a stepwell was thus more than civic duty. It was an act of piety, a way of honoring the ancestors who built it and the deities who sustained it. This answers a critical question about longevity. A system upheld by faith and tradition possesses a resilience that pure utility alone cannot guarantee. It creates a cultural memory, a story that explains why the work must continue long after the original engineers have passed. The sacred dimension of water reminds us that for these civilizations, infrastructure was never soulless. It was a covenant, a physical manifestation of a promise made between a people, their leaders, and the mysterious, essential force that made their world possible. To understand why they built with such care is to understand that they were not just moving liquid, they were stewarding a fragment of the divine. And when that covenant was forgotten, the consequences were not merely logistical, but existential, leaving behind silent stone where once there was both water and meaning. The silent strength of an aqueduct lies not in its arches, but in the unseen chemistry binding its stones together. While grand designs captured the imagination, the true unsung heroes of ancient water management were the humble, revolutionary materials that made those designs possible. A brilliant channel is useless if the water seeps away into the earth or if the pipe shatters under pressure. Solving these problems demanded a quiet kind of genius, one that transformed local earth and fire into substances that could defy time and the elements. Consider the simple terracotta pipe, used by civilizations from the Minoans on Crete to the Indus Valley. Its invention was a leap forward in controlled distribution. But the critical innovation was in the joints. The Minoans, masters of palace plumbing, crafted pipes with flanged ends that fit snugly into one another, and they sealed these connections with a mixture of clay and lime. This prevented leaks at the seams, allowing water to be directed precisely where it was needed within a building, a fundamental step toward modern plumbing. Yet terracotta had its limits. It was brittle and could crack under high pressure or ground shifts. For larger, more ambitious projects, something stronger and more versatile was required. That need led to one of the most consequential material innovations in history, Roman hydraulic concrete. This was no ordinary mortar. Its magic ingredient was a volcanic ash called pozzolana, found in abundance near Rome. When this ash was mixed with lime and aggregate, it created a paste that not only hardened in the presence of water, but actually required it for the chemical reaction to complete. This concrete could be poured into wooden forms directly underwater to build harbor breakwaters, and it formed a monolithic, waterproof mass that was incredibly resistant to erosion. The Romans perfected its use in their aqueducts, lining channels with it to create a smooth, impermeable surface that minimized friction and loss. The longevity of their works is staggering. The Barbegal Aqueduct and Watermill Complex in southern France, with its intricate system of channels and mill races built in the 1st century, still stands in impressive ruins today, a testament to the enduring quality of this ancient cement. Across the world, other cultures developed their own localized solutions. In China, engineers building the vast network of canals for transportation and irrigation faced the constant threat of seepage eroding the canal banks. Their answer was a layered approach, using compacted clay as a waterproof liner, often reinforced with stone revetments or woven bamboo mats. This created a flexible, durable barrier that adapted to the soil beneath it. Similarly, in the arid American Southwest, ancestral pueblones used a clay-based plaster to seal their reservoirs, a technique that allowed them to store precious runoff in a landscape of little rainfall. These innovations share a profound common thread. They were born from a deep engagement with local materials. The Romans did not invent pozzolana. They discovered its properties through observation and experimentation. The Chinese use of layered clay and stone was a direct response to the soils and resources at hand. This local sourcing was not a limitation, but a driver of ingenuity. It forced engineers to understand the characteristics of their immediate environment and to develop technologies that worked in harmony with them, minimizing transport costs and creating solutions uniquely suited to regional conditions. The lesson for our own era of carbon-intensive concrete and global supply chains is striking. Ancient material science points toward a philosophy of sustainable construction, one that looks first to the geology underfoot. It asks a quiet but urgent question: in our pursuit of stronger and faster materials, have we overlooked the timeless wisdom of building with what the land itself provides, creating solutions that are not just durable, but inherently rooted in their place? This mastery over matter allowed water to flow where it was commanded, but the ultimate purpose of that flow was often to perform work, to harness its raw power to accomplish tasks no human or animal could match. Water is a patient collaborator, but also a silent accountant, keeping a meticulous record of every intervention. For all their brilliance, ancient water systems were not immune to a fundamental law of nature: every action prompts a reaction. The very channels that brought life could, over generations, become agents of a slow, unintended transformation, one that sometimes undermined the civilizations they supported. The most pervasive of these hidden costs was salinization, a process as relentless as it was invisible. In regions like the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of agriculture between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, irrigation was the engine of surplus and empire. Yet, with each flooding of the fields, mineral salts dissolved from the bedrock were carried onto the land. Under the intense sun, the water would evaporate, leaving those salts behind to accumulate in the soil, season after season, century after century. Initially, the fertile silt deposits from the rivers would mask the problem, but over time, the salt concentration would build to toxic levels. Wheat, a staple crop sensitive to salinity, would begin to fail. Cuneiform tablets from ancient Mesopotamia record a telling shift as barley, a more salt-tolerant grain, gradually replaced wheat in agricultural reports. This was not a choice of preference, but a quiet concession to a changing environment. The land itself was becoming less generous, its bounty slowly diminishing as a direct result of the practice that had unlocked it. This was a trade-off measured not in years but in civilizations. Similarly, the problem of siltation turned hydraulic advantages into logistical burdens. Canals and reservoirs that were not meticulously maintained would gradually fill with eroded soil and sediment carried by the water. A once deep reservoir would become shallow, holding less water and evaporating more quickly. A canal's flow would slow, requiring constant, labor-intensive dredging to remain effective. The decline of a system could be as simple as a community no longer having the organized labor or the collective will to keep up with this endless task. The story becomes even more complex when we consider societies like the Maya of Central America or the Hohokam of the American Southwest. Both developed sophisticated irrigation to support populations in challenging environments. The Maya built reservoirs and canal systems within their city-states, while the Hohokam engineered over 1,000 miles of canals in the arid Salt River Valley. Their achievements were monumental, yet evidence suggests that their water management may have contributed to vulnerabilities that amplified other pressures. For the Maya, intensive agriculture and landscape modification, including water management, may have led to localized deforestation and soil degradation. When periods of prolonged drought arrived, as climate records indicate they did, the engineered systems may have been pushed beyond their capacity. The reservoirs could dry up, and the altered landscape may have been less resilient to the stress. The result was not a single cause for decline, but a cascade where environmental strain, possibly intensified by human modification, interacted with social factors like conflict or resource competition. The Hohokam story echoes this theme of complexity. Their vast canal network allowed for a flourishing culture for centuries, but maintaining such an extensive system in a fragile desert ecology required perfect harmony. A major flood could breach canals, requiring massive repair. A long drought could lower the river level, making the intake points for the canals useless. Some researchers propose that a combination of climatic shifts and the sheer difficulty of sustaining their hydraulic footprint may have played a role in their eventual dispersal and the transformation of their society. These are not tales of foolishness but of nuance. They remind us that engineering exists within a web of ecological relationships. A water system is not a closed loop. It is a new element introduced into a dynamic environment. The ancient engineers were masters of hydrology, but the long-term consequences of changing soil chemistry, river morphology, and regional microclimates were often beyond their horizon of prediction. This prompts a difficult but essential question: where is the line between managing an ecosystem and overwhelming it? When does a helpful adaptation become a fragile dependency? These historical lessons are not accusations against the past, but crucial mirrors for our present. We face our own versions of these trade-offs, from salinization in modern irrigated fields to the downstream impacts of massive dams. The ancient record urges a humility alongside our innovation. It asks us to look beyond the immediate promise of control, to consider what ledger the land itself is keeping, and what the final accounting might reveal generations from now. This awareness of limits and consequences forms a critical part of the legacy, moving us from admiration of pure technique toward a deeper wisdom about balance. And it raises a final, poignant thought about these systems, not as ruins of failure, but as enduring questions. What happens when the society that built them is gone, and the water is left to find its own way once more? A silent canal holds more than just sand, it holds a question. Scattered across the deserts and plains of the world are the skeletal remains of water networks that once pulsed with life, now lying still under the sun. These are not ruins of sudden destruction, but of slow relinquishment, places where the careful conversation between a people and their water source finally fell silent. Unraveling why these sophisticated systems were abandoned is one of archaeology's most haunting puzzles, a detective story written in sediment and stone. The causes are rarely singular, but a web of pressures that, over time, became too heavy to bear. A primary suspect is the climate itself. A prolonged, multi-generational drought could lower water tables beyond the reach of Qanat mother wells or shrink rivers until canal intakes ran dry. Tree ring data and sediment cores from lake beds now provide stark evidence of these ancient dry periods, mega droughts that could last for decades. A society might endure a few lean years, but when the rains fail for a human lifetime, even the most resilient infrastructure can become a network of empty promises. Geological change could also rewrite the rules. Earthquakes might alter underground aquifers, diverting the hidden streams that fed a Qanat. Or the gradual silting of a river delta, a natural process, could slowly raise the land, making gravity-fed canals impossible to operate without constant, heroic dredging that eventually became unsustainable. Yet, environmental stress alone seldom tells the whole story. These physical pressures intersected with human fragility. Political collapse or invasion could shatter the social contract that maintained the system. The intricate rules, the role of the water judge, the communal labor drafts, all depended on a stable, recognized authority. When empires fractured into warring states or when a conquering power had different priorities, that essential organization could evaporate faster than reservoir water. The knowledge of how to clean a specific tunnel or when to open a particular sluice gate resided in the collective memory of elders and specialists. If a society was dispersed by conflict or famine, that living library was lost. Economic collapse could achieve the same result. If trade routes shifted and the wealth that funded massive public works dried up, there would be no surplus to pay for maintenance. Farmers might abandon marginal fields first, then the canals that served them, creating a cascade of neglect that eventually reached the heart of the system. Consider two enigmatic case studies. In the Turpan Depression of Western China, a scorching desert basin, one finds the ghostly lines of abandoned karez, the local name for Qanat systems. These underground channels once turned Turpan into a grape-growing oasis. Their decline is a tapestry of causes, likely including shifts in climate that depleted the mountain snowmelt feeding them, combined with the rise of newer, deeper well technology that offered a simpler, if less sustainable, solution. Over time, maintaining the long, communal karez became less of a priority, and one by one they were left to choke with silt. Far to the west, in the heart of the Sahara, lie the remnants of the Garamantian civilization. Between 2,000 and 1,500 years ago, this Berber kingdom flourished in what is now Libya by tapping fossil groundwater with an extensive network of fagaras, another form of Qanat. They built towns and farms in the desert, but fossil water is a non-renewable resource, like an ancient bank account with no deposits. Evidence suggests they pumped this treasure for centuries until the levels dropped too low. Coupled with possible climatic drying and perhaps social upheaval, their remarkable hydraulic feat became obsolete, and their centers were gradually reclaimed by the dunes. Today, archaeologists use tools like satellite imagery to spot the faint, straight lines of buried canals invisible from the ground. They drill sediment cores from ancient lakebeds to read the history of rainfall and drought in layers of pollen and dust. They piece together pottery fragments and settlement patterns to see when populations shrank and moved. Each clue adds a word to the story of decline. The silence of these ruins whispers a profound and unifying lesson. It speaks to the fragility of even the most advanced societies when the delicate interdependence between their technology, their environment, and their social stability is broken. A canal is not just a ditch, it is a covenant. It requires not only water to flow, but a people to care, a climate to cooperate, and a reason to continue the labor. When one strand of that web fails, the entire structure can slowly unravel. This leads us to a final, pressing reflection. If these ancient systems hold such powerful lessons about resilience and fragility, what do they have to say to our modern world, facing its own profound water challenges? The grandest aqueduct casts a shadow, but it is the countless small, daily shadows moving along its base that truly tell the story of water. While history remembers the names of engineers and emperors, the lifeblood of every ancient water system was the quiet, relentless labor of those whose hands touched the water and the earth each day. Their roles were often sharply defined by gender and social status, weaving the practical task of water management directly into the fabric of daily life and hierarchy. In countless agricultural societies, the responsibility for water collection fell primarily to women and girls. This was not a casual chore, but a central pillar of domestic life that dictated the rhythm of their days. The journey to a well, a spring, or a riverbank was time-consuming, physically demanding, and often socially complex. It was a space where women could gather, exchange news, and forge community bonds away from the domestic sphere, as seen vividly at the Stepwells of India, which served as subterranean social hubs. Yet this essential duty also reinforced a gendered division of labor, anchoring women's work to the immediate needs of the household and limiting their mobility. Beyond collection, the brute force required to build and maintain these systems rested on broader shoulders. The construction of a Qanat, for instance, was an endeavor of terrifying difficulty. The Mukani, the diggers, descended into narrow, pitch-black tunnels with simple hand tools, carving through rock and earth, always at risk of collapse or asphyxiation. This was specialized, dangerous work, often performed by teams of skilled laborers or, in some societies, by enslaved people or prisoners. Theirs was a knowledge passed through apprenticeship, a tactile understanding of geology and soil that no blueprint could capture. Maintenance, too, was a continuous communal tax. Canals required annual dredging to clear silt. Reservoir walls needed constant repair. This work often fell to farmers as a form of corvée labor, a duty owed to the state or the local ruler in exchange for their water rights. In this way, water management directly reinforced social and political hierarchies. The authority to call up labor for these projects was a key expression of power, while the obligation to provide it cemented one's place in the social order. But within this structure, there was also agency and specialized skill. Artisans crafted the terracotta pipes and waterproof mortars. Woodworkers built and maintained the water-lifting devices like shadufs or norias. Local water masters, often elected or appointed from within the community, possessed the nuanced understanding of the system's flow and the respected authority to settle disputes between neighbors over irrigation turns. This intricate web of roles, from the enslaved digger to the female water bearer to the respected canal supervisor, formed the living, breathing mechanism that kept the stone channels flowing. Their collective effort transformed brilliant engineering from a static monument into a dynamic, functioning life support system. To see only the arch and not the countless hands that steadied each stone is to miss the human truth of these wonders. It compels us to ask whose labor upholds the systems we depend on today, and whose stories remain in the shadows of our own modern aqueducts. The cool, clear sound of a fountain is a deliberate kind of music. Beyond the channels that fed crops and the pipes that supplied homes, ancient engineers turned their mastery toward a higher purpose, the creation of beauty. Water was not merely a resource to be controlled, it was an artistic medium, a living element to be sculpted into the very experience of a place. This aesthetic dimension reveals a profound truth. For these cultures, managing water was ultimately about crafting paradise on earth. The most iconic expression of this ideal is the Persian garden or Chahar Bagh. Its name means four gardens, and its design is a geometric vision of order and abundance. A central water channel, often fed by a Qanat, divides the space into four quadrants, symbolizing the four rivers of paradise described in sacred texts. The water flows gently, reflecting the sky and the carefully arranged cypress trees and fragrant flowers. Its sound is a constant, soothing whisper. This was not a wild landscape, but a perfected one, a microcosm of the cosmos where the human, the divine, and the natural element of water existed in harmonious balance. It was a place for poetry, conversation, and quiet contemplation, a sensory refuge from the arid world beyond its walls. The Romans, too, understood water as theater. In their cities, the public fountain, or nymphaeum, was a monument to civic pride and imperial generosity. These were not simple basins, but elaborate, multi-story facades adorned with statues of gods, nymphs, and marine creatures. Water cascaded from spouts and overflowed from tier to tier, a dazzling display of abundance that showcased both engineering skill and the wealth of the state. The sound was not a whisper, but a celebratory roar, announcing the presence of civilization. The cool mist from these fountains would temper the heat of the forum, creating a pocket of sensory pleasure in the heart of public life. This fusion reached breathtaking heights in places like the Alhambra Palace in Granada, Spain. Here, Islamic hydraulic genius was inseparable from architectural poetry. Narrow channels called acequias run along the edges of courtyard floors, their perfectly still surfaces mirroring the intricate arches and filigree above. In the Court of the Lions, a central fountain supported by 12 marble lions channels water outward through 4 small runnels, dividing the courtyard into 4 parts, echoing the ancient Persian ideal. The sound is a gentle, almost private trickle designed for intimacy and reflection. Every element, from the channel's path to the basin's shape, was calculated to enhance the serenity and beauty of the space, to create an environment that appealed to all the senses and symbolized a sovereign's control over nature's most precious gift. In the East, Chinese imperial gardens like the Summer Palace in Beijing pursued a different aesthetic philosophy, one of curated naturalism. Here, engineers and artists collaborated to mimic the wild beauty of mountains and lakes, but with exquisite control. Serpentine lakes were dug, and islands were constructed to create perfect, painterly compositions. Water was directed to create quiet ponds for lotus flowers, gentle streams that wound through rockeries, and even cascades that simulated mountain waterfalls. The goal was to evoke a sense of wandering through an idealized landscape, where water was the unifying, life-giving force in a scene of peaceful harmony. This artistic investment in water systems answers a profound question about these societies. Why pour such creative effort into what was, at its core, a utility? The answer is that the functional and the beautiful were never separate categories. To bring water into a city was an act of power, but to make it sing, to make it reflect, to make it cool the air, that was an act of culture. It signaled that survival had been mastered, and now the human spirit could flourish. The deliberate harnessing of water's sound, sight, and coolness shows a deep understanding of its psychological power. It could calm the mind, inspire awe, and create an atmosphere of peace or grandeur. This pursuit reminds us that the highest aim of any technology is not just to solve a problem, but to enrich the human experience, to build not just a place to live, but a place that feels truly alive. And if water could be shaped into art for contemplation and pleasure, could it also be directed toward a more urgent communal purpose, one that protected not just the spirit, but the very health of the city? Silk was not the only precious cargo traveling the ancient roads. Alongside bolts of fabric and sacks of spice moved something far more vital, a blueprint for survival. The history of water management is, in many ways, a map of human connection, where brilliant ideas about channeling life itself flowed along the same pathways as trade and faith. Technologies were not invented in isolation and jealously guarded. They were shared, adapted, and refined through centuries of cross-cultural exchange. The movement of hydraulic knowledge reveals a global conversation in stone and water, a testament to our shared need and collective ingenuity. Consider the journey of the Qanat. Born in the highlands of ancient Persia, this underground marvel did not remain a local secret. As Persian influence expanded and trade routes stabilized, the knowledge of how to whisper to a mountain spread westward. It traveled with merchants and engineers along the incense route to the Arabian Peninsula, where in Oman the systems became known as a flage, still functioning today under communal management. The technology crossed into North Africa with the spread of Islam, where in places like Morocco and Algeria, Qanats called Qatara brought water to oasis settlements. This transfer was not a simple copy and paste. In each new environment, the core principle was adapted. The depth of the mother well, the gradient of the tunnel, the materials for reinforcement, all were tweaked to suit local geology and climate. The idea proved so resilient it even reached the New World, carried by Spanish colonists who had seen similar systems in North Africa. In the deserts of northern Mexico and the southwestern United States, they constructed galerías filtrantes, filtration galleries that operated on the same fundamental principle as the Persian Qanat, tapping subsurface water and guiding it by gravity to settlements and missions. This was an idea that had traveled across continents and millennia, constantly reborn to meet a universal human need. Architectural forms traveled just as far. The Roman mastery of the arch, so essential for their towering aqueducts, did not vanish with the empire. The knowledge was preserved, studied, and brilliantly advanced by Islamic engineers during the Golden Age. They incorporated the arch into their own magnificent waterworks, like the raised aqueducts that supplied the city of Cordoba in Spain. From there, the architectural vocabulary, along with treatises on hydraulics translated into Latin, eventually influenced the engineers of the European Renaissance, who looked back to both Roman and Islamic precedents as they revived large-scale water projects. Perhaps one of the clearest examples of this technological diffusion is the noria, the large water wheel used for irrigation. Originating in the Middle East, these great wooden wheels, often driven by the current of the river itself, were designed to lift water from a lower channel to a higher aqueduct or field. As Islamic rule expanded into the Iberian Peninsula, the noria came with it. In the Spanish region of Andalusia, cities like Córdoba and Toledo became centers for this technology. The iconic Noria de la Albalafia in Córdoba, originally built in the Arab period to supply the royal palace and gardens, stands as a monument to this transfer. The design was so effective that it persisted for centuries, and the concept traveled further, influencing water-lifting devices across the Mediterranean. Each adaptation was a conversation. A community receiving the technology would ask new questions of it. Does our river flow too slowly to turn a current wheel? Then we will adapt it to be turned by animals. Is our wood different? Then we will modify the joinery. The result was a continuous thread of innovation, where each culture added its own stitch to the tapestry. This global perspective fundamentally changes how we see these ancient systems. It moves the story from one of isolated genius to one of interconnected ingenuity. A solution crafted in the mountains of Persia could, centuries later, help a missionary in the Sonoran Desert coax a garden from the sand. It asks a powerful question about human progress. How often has our greatest leaps forward been not a solitary invention, but a moment of fruitful collision when a traveler's tale met a local challenge and sparked a new synthesis? The history of water management suggests this is not the exception, but the rule. Our ancestors were connected by a web of knowledge as vital as any network of canals, proving that the most essential resource we have ever shared is not water alone, but the bright, flowing stream of ideas about how to care for it. Their network of canals was a river of human intention laid across the desert. In the blistering expanse of the Sonoran Desert, where temperatures can soar past 110 degrees, the Hohokam culture performed an act of hydrological defiance for over 1,000 years. From roughly 300 CE to around 1450 CE, they transformed the valleys of the Salt and Gila rivers into a green and productive landscape, constructing the most extensive and sophisticated irrigation system in pre-Columbian North America. Their canals were not small community ditches but monumental public works. Some primary channels stretched for miles, wide and deep enough to carry a significant portion of a river's flow, branching into smaller distributaries that fed fields of maize, beans, squash, and cotton. The scale is almost incomprehensible when you consider their tools: digging sticks, stone hoes, and woven baskets. This was a civilization built not with metal, but with coordinated will and an intimate understanding of their harsh, beautiful home. The engineering was precise and adaptive. Hohokam canal builders displayed a masterful grasp of hydraulics. They understood that to move water efficiently over long distances, a canal needed a very gentle, consistent slope. Archaeologists studying the ghostly impressions of these canals, now visible from the air or in cutaway street excavations in modern Phoenix, have calculated gradients that often match what a modern engineer would prescribe. They built clever headgates at the points where they diverted water from the river, using woven brush and log structures to control the flow, especially during the volatile flash floods of the summer monsoon. Their canals were often lined with clay to reduce seepage in the porous desert soil, and they constructed settling basins to capture silt before it could clog the smaller channels. This was not haphazard digging, it was a refined, generations-old science of desert rivers. Such a vast, interconnected network could not exist without an equally sophisticated social structure. maintaining hundreds of miles of canals, resolving disputes over water allocation, and organizing the labor for dredging and repair required a high degree of cooperation and likely some form of centralized authority. While the Hohokam did not leave behind evidence of kings or emperors, their large platform mounds and ball courts suggest the presence of ritual leaders or councils who could coordinate community effort. The system itself would have forged a collective identity, binding scattered villages into a single hydraulic society where your survival depended on your neighbor's commitment to maintaining the shared lifeline. Water rights were probably the most important law, and the calendar was dictated by the flow of the river and the needs of the crops. Then, around the middle of the 15th century, the great canal networks began to fall silent. The large villages were gradually abandoned, and the Hohokam way of life dispersed, transforming into the ancestral cultures of the Awadam and other desert peoples. The question of why is a central mystery. The evidence points not to a single catastrophe, but to a convergence of pressures. Climatic data suggests the region experienced periods of severe drought that would have lowered river levels, making the elaborate canal intakes ineffective. At the same time, there is evidence of massive floods, which could have breached headgates and filled canals with destructive debris, requiring Herculean efforts to restore. Some researchers propose that centuries of irrigation may have slowly degraded the environment, perhaps increasing soil salinity or altering local water tables. These environmental stresses likely amplified social tensions. In a time of scarcity, the very cooperation that built the system could have fractured under the strain of deciding who gets the dwindling water. The intricate social contract may have simply unraveled. The modern metropolis of Phoenix, Arizona, literally sits atop this ancient hydrological footprint. Many of the city's major canals follow the precise routes first surveyed by Hohokam engineers over a millennium ago. This is a haunting and powerful legacy, a reminder that our own urban oasis is built upon a much older dream of greening the desert. The Hohokam story is not one of failure, but of profound adaptation and its limits. They achieved a stunning sustainability for centuries, a testament to human ingenuity in partnership with a specific place. Their eventual dispersal teaches a nuanced lesson about resilience. It suggests that even the most brilliant environmental adaptation exists within a window of climatic and social stability. When multiple stresses align, drought, flood, and social strain, a system optimized for a particular balance can become fragile. Their legacy asks us a quiet, urgent question as we manage our own vast water projects in an era of climate change. How do we build systems that are not only sophisticated, but also flexible enough to endure when the ancient rhythms of the desert or the planet begin to shift in unexpected ways? The names we give to places are rarely accidental. They are echoes carrying the memory of a landscape's most essential feature long after the feature itself has changed or vanished. Our maps are dotted with these ghosts of ancient waterworks, a hidden archive written in plain sight. The very word wadi from Arabic names not a permanent river, but a dry riverbed that channels water only after rare rains. This single term encapsulates an entire environmental reality and a way of life adapted to scarcity and sudden abundance. Similarly, a sequia, the Spanish word for a community irrigation ditch, travels back through history to the Arabic asakia, meaning the water conduit or the one who gives water to drink. It carried with it from Al-Andalus not just a technology, but a philosophy of shared water rights and communal management that took root in the American Southwest. Even the humble sewer has a noble hydraulic origin, derived from the Latin exequaria, meaning to drain out water. These are not dead words in a dictionary. They are living fossils of human ingenuity, proof that our struggle and partnership with water is embedded in the bedrock of our language. This linguistic legacy is stamped directly onto the geography we navigate. An aqueduct road on a modern street sign often marks the path of a long-vanished Roman channel, its stone arcades replaced by asphalt but its purpose remembered. Towns across Europe named Fontaine or Fuente or Font whisper of the once vital spring that determined the settlement's location. In England, names ending in ford speak of a shallow river crossing, a strategic point defined by water. In the arid American West, a place called Arroyo Seco literally means dry creek, a frank and practical description that warns of both its usual state and its potential for dangerous flash floods. Each of these names is a story compressed into a label, a way for generations to pass down critical environmental knowledge. They tell you where to find water, where to cross a river, or where an ancient community invested its labor to make the land livable. This deep weaving of hydraulic infrastructure into identity and daily speech reveals something profound about these societies. The systems were not external utilities, they were integral to how people saw themselves and their world. To be from a town centered on a great stepwell or fed by a specific Qanat was part of your origin story. The vocabulary of water management would have been common, everyday knowledge, the subject of proverbs, songs, and disputes. This linguistic embedding ensured that the technology shaped culture in the most lasting way possible by shaping thought itself. It created a shared mental map where water was the central landmark. When we use these words today, often without a second thought, we are inadvertently speaking the language of ancient engineers and farmers, keeping their priorities alive in our syntax. It prompts a simple but revealing exercise. Look at the names around you, the streets, the neighborhoods, the local landmarks. What stories do they hold about the relationship between people and water in that place? Is there a mill street, a spring lane, a river road? Each is a clue to a forgotten dependency, a whisper from a time when the landscape spoke more clearly of its gifts and its challenges. This connection between the tangible ruins and the intangible world of language shows that the truest monument to these ancient systems may not be the stone that remains, but the words we still use to find our way. A buried canal leaves no visible trace, yet its story is still written in the earth. Uncovering the true scale of ancient water management requires us to see through soil and stone, to read landscapes with a new kind of vision. This is the work of hydroarchaeology, a field that merges the study of the past with the most advanced tools of the present, revealing lost worlds without ever lifting a shovel. The revolution began with the view from above. For decades, archaeologists knew the Khmer Empire's capital of Angkor in Cambodia was vast, but the jungle canopy hid its full story. Then came LiDAR, light detection and ranging. Mounted on aircraft, this technology fires millions of laser pulses toward the ground. By measuring how long each pulse takes to bounce back, it can strip away the dense vegetation digitally, creating a precise three-dimensional map of the ground surface beneath. What it revealed at Angkor was staggering, an intricate, sprawling metropolis engineered around water. The scan showed a vast grid of canals, embankments, and reservoirs, including the massive West Barre, a man-made lake 8 kilometers long and 2.2 kilometers wide. It revealed how the entire urban layout was designed to capture, store, and distribute monsoon water on a scale that dwarfed previous estimates. This one technological leap rewrote the history of a civilization, showing it was not just a collection of temples but a hydrological masterpiece. Back on the ground, other tools listen for whispers in the soil. Ground-penetrating radar sends radio waves into the earth, which bounce back when they hit a change in material, like the compacted floor of an ancient canal or the stone lining of a forgotten reservoir. This non-invasive method allows archaeologists to map subsurface features with remarkable accuracy before any excavation begins, preserving the site while planning their research. Drone photography adds another layer, capturing high-resolution aerial imagery that can reveal subtle patterns in crop growth or soil color. hints of buried walls or channels that are invisible from a person's standing height. But technology does more than map structures, it reads the environment itself. Scientists take core samples from lake beds and old reservoir sediments. In these vertical columns of mud, history is stacked in layers like pages in a book. By analyzing pollen grains preserved in each layer, they can reconstruct what plants were growing in different eras, tracing the rise of agriculture or the onset of a drought. They look for chemical signatures and microscopic particles that indicate soil erosion from deforested hillsides or the lingering salts from intensive irrigation. This paleo-environmental research allows us to move beyond the engineering to understand the consequences, to see how these systems interacted with and sometimes stressed their surrounding ecosystems. This fusion of disciplines means the story of ancient water is never static. Each flyover with a LiDAR-equipped plane, each radar survey of a desert plain can unveil a new chapter. In the southwestern United States, these tools are revealing the true complexity of Hohokam canal networks. In the deserts of the Middle East, they are locating lost caravanserais that were only possible because of hidden Qanat systems. We are not just discovering forgotten pipes and channels, we are recovering a lost intelligence, a way of thinking shaped by an intimate dialogue with a specific place. The quiet hum of a ground-penetrating radar unit is a kind of time machine, translating the silent language of buried earthworks into maps, data, and ultimately understanding. It allows us to appreciate the full breadth of ancient ingenuity, not from speculation, but from evidence etched invisibly into the landscape itself. This scientific detective work raises a compelling parallel for our own time. If future archaeologists were to study our cities 1,000 years from now, what would their remote sensing tools reveal about our relationship with water? Would they see a network of resilience or a pattern of fragility? The answers we are uncovering about the past inevitably hold up a mirror to our present. A stone aqueduct marching across a valley is a statement of intent carved into the skyline. Beneath the physical achievement of these ancient systems lies a deeper current, a philosophical struggle that still defines our relationship with the planet. Were these projects acts of defiance against a chaotic natural world, or were they humble attempts to participate in a sacred order? The answer varies with the worldview of the builders, and it offers a key to understanding not just their technology, but their soul. The Roman approach was unambiguous. It was rooted in the concept of imperium, a word meaning command or empire, which extended beyond politics to the natural realm. For Roman engineers and statesmen, nature was a force to be subdued, ordered, and bent to human will for the glory of the state. The philosopher Seneca wrote of how human reason should command the elements, stating that we do not merely accept the gifts of the earth, we draw them forth. The aqueduct is the purest expression of this ethos. It does not ask the mountain for permission, it tunnels through it. It does not follow the river's winding course, it imposes a straight line across valleys. Water was a resource to be captured, measured, and allocated by human law and engineering, a testament to the power of rational order over wild randomness. This was control as a civilizing mission, where mastering hydrology was synonymous with building civilization itself. On the other side of the world, a different philosophy guided the hand that shaped the landscape. In ancient Chinese thought, particularly within Taoism, the ideal was not domination but harmonious integration. The concept of wu-wei, often translated as effortless action or non-forcing, advocated for acting in accordance with the natural flow of things, like a sailor using the wind rather than fighting it. Water itself was a central metaphor in Taoist texts, praised for its yielding nature that could, over time, wear away the hardest stone. This philosophy deeply influenced statecraft and engineering. The Guanzi, an ancient Chinese political text, discusses water governance not as conquest, but as a form of sage rulership, stating that the wise ruler manages water like a skilled doctor managing the body's vital energies. Chinese hydraulic projects like the Duzhongyan irrigation system exemplify this. Instead of damming the Min River with a massive wall, engineers in the 3rd century BCE created a levee to gently divide the flow, a spillway to discharge excess water and silt, and a channel to irrigate the plains. It was a design that worked with the river's own dynamics, guiding its energy rather than confronting it head-on, and it still functions today. This is not a tale of simple opposites, but of a spectrum of belief. Many cultures, like the Nabateans or the builders of Chinampas, operated somewhere in between, displaying a profound observational intelligence that sought to augment natural processes with careful, minimal intervention. Their goal was not to impose an alien order, but to amplify the latent fertility of their specific place, to become expert partners in a local ecological dialogue. These ancient debates are not relics, they echo loudly in our modern dilemmas. When we build a massive dam to control a river, we are channeling the Roman spirit of imperium. When we design a wetland to naturally filter runoff or restore a river's meandering course to prevent floods, we are applying a philosophy closer to Wu Wei. Our current environmental crisis forces us to ask the same foundational question these ancients grappled with: what is the ultimate goal of our power? Is it to make the world obedient, or to learn its language so we might live within its grammar? The silent stones of an aqueduct and the still-flowing waters of an ancient irrigation system each hold an answer, a frozen moment of human belief about our place in the world. They challenge us to consider whether our most brilliant engineering is an act of conversation or a declaration of war. The climate has never been a still photograph, but a slow-moving film. Ancient civilizations did not exist in a stable, unchanging world. They lived through profound climatic shifts that tested the limits of their ingenuity. Long before modern instruments, the planet experienced medieval warm periods that expanded growing seasons and mini ice ages that shortened them. It endured mega-droughts that could last for decades, turning reliable rivers into dusty gullies. These were not mere inconveniences, they were existential challenges that demanded a response, and the archaeological record shows us how societies answered. In the dense rainforests of the Maya lowlands, the rhythm of life was dictated by a seasonal pattern of wet and dry. But when rainfall became less predictable, the Maya engineered a solution into the heart of their cities. At Tikal, a powerful city-state, they transformed the landscape itself. They paved over large plazas with plaster to create vast catchment areas, funneling rainwater through carefully sloped channels into massive, lined reservoirs called aqueducts. These were not just holes in the ground, but sophisticated, multi-chambered tanks that could store millions of gallons of water to sustain the population through the dry season and unreliable rains. Their entire urban design became a hydraulic machine, capturing every possible drop. This was adaptation written in stone and plaster, a direct response to environmental uncertainty. We know these patterns not from guesswork, but from a remarkable scientific record. Paleoclimatologists read the planet's diary in layers of ice drilled from ancient glaciers and in the rings of long-lived trees. An ice core from Greenland holds tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, and its chemical composition can tell us the temperature of the world centuries ago. A bristlecone pine in the White Mountains of California, living for thousands of years, has rings that grow wide in wet years and desperately narrow in years of drought. When scientists cross-reference these natural archives with the timelines of human history, startling correlations emerge. Periods of intense hydraulic innovation, like the spread of Qanat technology or the construction of great reservoirs, often align with evidence of increasing aridity. Societies were not building these wonders in times of plenty, they were engineering their survival in response to growing scarcity. Conversely, the abrupt abandonment of some systems coincides with evidence of extreme, prolonged drought that simply overwhelmed the design. The past becomes a long-term laboratory, showing us which strategies held under pressure and which ones cracked. So what made a system resilient? The historical evidence points to flexibility and decentralization. A single, massive reservoir, like those of the Maya or the Roman aqueducts dependent on distant springs, created a centralized vulnerability. If the climate shift exceeded the system's capacity, the entire society faced crisis. In contrast, distributed systems often showed greater endurance. The Aflaj of Oman, with their many independent channels tapping smaller water sources, or the countless village-level tanks across ancient Sri Lanka, created a mosaic of water security. If one failed, others could persist. The most resilient strategies also incorporated a deep knowledge of the local environment, allowing for quick, low-tech adjustments. A community managing a network of small check dams and terraced fields could more easily adapt their practices to a changing rainfall pattern than a society reliant on a monolithic state-run canal. This historical perspective reframes our current climate crisis. We are not the first generation to face a shifting world, but we are the first with a global view of the planet's climatic past. The ancient struggles offer a crucial context, a catalogue of human responses to environmental stress. They teach us that technological sophistication alone is not a guarantee of survival. True resilience lies in designing systems that are not just strong but also adaptable, that are embedded in local knowledge, and that distribute risk rather than concentrating it. The question for us is not whether we will adapt, but which ancient lessons we will choose to remember as we write our own chapter in this long, unfolding story of life on a changing Earth. A single surplus stalk of grain changes everything. When a farmer's field, nourished by a reliable canal or a steady Qanat, produces more than their family can eat, the entire equation of a society shifts. This is the quiet, revolutionary moment where water management transcends survival and becomes the foundation of an economy. That extra grain is not just food, it is potential. It can be stored for lean years, traded for tools or cloth, or collected as a tax by a central authority. This simple surplus is the seed from which grows trade, specialization, and ultimately empire. The story of ancient economics is in many ways a story written in water. Consider the Roman Empire, a colossal urban machine that required mountains of grain to feed its million citizens in the city of Rome alone. That grain did not come from the Italian countryside alone. It was shipped across the Mediterranean from provinces like Egypt and North Africa, regions whose fertility was itself an engineered miracle. Roman hydraulic technology, from vast irrigation networks to well-managed river systems, turned these lands into the breadbasket of an empire. The grain dole in Rome was not just a social program, it was the final link in a hydrological supply chain that began with a controlled water source thousands of miles away. The state's ability to guarantee this flow, to tax the resulting agricultural wealth, and to distribute it was the very bedrock of its political power and stability. Water created the surplus that filled the state's coffers and fed its legions. This pattern repeats across the ancient world, often with even more direct connections. In the arid highlands of southern Arabia, in what is today Yemen, the legendary wealth of the spice trade was not born from the desert air, it was cultivated by water. The kingdom of Saba, with its capital at Marib, sat astride the incense route. Its power came from frankincense and myrrh, but those precious resins were grown in plantations sustained by one of the ancient world's most monumental irrigation works, the Great Dam of Marib. This massive earthen structure with sophisticated stone sluices captured seasonal floodwaters from the wadis, diverting it through canals to irrigate a vast oasis. The dam's failure in the 6th century CE is noted in the Quran as a momentous disaster. a testament to how central this single hydraulic structure was to the region's entire economic and cultural identity. The water did not just grow trees, it grew an international trade network that connected Arabia to the markets of Rome and India, creating a merchant elite of fabulous wealth. This transformation from local subsistence to integrated trade is the true economic alchemy of water. It allows for specialization. When not every person needs to farm to eat, some can become potters, weavers, soldiers, priests, or administrators. Cities swell with artisans and traders. Marketplaces buzz with the exchange of goods from distant lands, goods paid for with the agricultural surplus that reliable water made possible. In some cases, the management of water became so central that it influenced the concept of value itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, the very unit of account, the shekel, was originally a weight of barley, the product of irrigated fields. Wages were often paid in grain or in silver weights that represented a share of that agricultural abundance. The control of water sources naturally translated into concentrated political and economic power. Those who controlled the headgates of the irrigation network or the distribution from a massive reservoir held the keys to the community's survival and prosperity. This could create a ruling class of hydraulic elites, whose wealth funded not only personal luxury but also the monumental architecture we admire today, from temples to palaces. The taxes on water or on the lands it watered built city walls, roads, and public monuments. In this light, an aqueduct is not just a piece of infrastructure, it is an economic engine, a capital investment that generated taxable wealth for centuries. So, how does water create wealth beyond mere survival? It does so by unlocking time and human potential. It frees a portion of society from the daily scramble for food, allowing for the invention, artistry, commerce, and governance that we call civilization. The intricate web of ancient globalization, with its silk roads and spice routes, was ultimately fed by countless local streams, carefully channeled and shared. The economic complexity of the ancient world rested on a simple, profound truth that the most valuable currency was always the next drop of water, and the social agreement that guided it to the root of a waiting seed. A system's greatest strength can become its most profound vulnerability. The same aqueduct that delivered life to a city could, if severed, become a dry scar of despair. For all their brilliance, ancient waterworks were not invincible, and their failures were often as monumental as their creations, leaving scars on the landscape and in cultural memory. Perhaps no single event captures this duality better than the story of the Great Dam of Marib. For over 1,000 years, this engineering marvel sustained the Sabaean kingdom in the deserts of Yemen. It was an earthen structure nearly 2,000 feet long, with sophisticated stone sluice gates that captured the flash floods from the mountains, diverting the water into a canal network that fed a vast, legendary oasis. This dam was the economic heart of the incense route, allowing the cultivation of frankincense and myrrh and supporting a population of tens of thousands. Its success was a testament to generations of maintenance and adaptation. Yet, inscriptions and later accounts, including a mention in the Quran as a momentous divine sign, point to a series of catastrophic failures. The final breach likely occurred in the 6th century, an event so culturally seismic it marked the end of an era. The technical cause was likely a perfect storm of pressures, a massive flood that overtopped the structure, combined with centuries of silt buildup that had raised the reservoir bed, reducing its capacity. When the dam gave way, it would not have been a simple leak. A wall of water and accumulated silt would have roared down the valley, wiping out the intricate canal network, drowning fields, and possibly destroying entire settlements downstream. The society built upon that controlled water was instantly faced with its opposite, uncontrollable ruin. The consequence was not just immediate loss, but a slow unraveling. The agricultural base that supported trade and urban life vanished. Populations likely dispersed, migrating to other regions of the Arabian Peninsula. A civilization defined by its mastery of water was ultimately dispersed by water's raw, unleashed power. This was not an isolated tragedy. Across the Roman world, aqueducts were strategic targets in warfare. During sieges, attacking armies knew that cutting the stone rivers feeding a city was more effective than any battering ram. The historian Procopius recorded that during the Gothic siege of Rome in the 6th century, the invaders deliberately destroyed sections of the aqueduct. The consequence inside the city walls was a quiet, grinding crisis. Public fountains fell silent. The great baths, centers of Roman social life, became empty, echoing halls. Without water to flush the sewers, sanitation deteriorated, increasing the risk of illness. The psychological impact was profound, a daily reminder that the engineered heartbeat of Roman civilization had been stilled. These events exposed the inherent risk of complex, centralized systems. They created a single point of failure, a society that channels all its water through one dam or one set of aqueducts ties its fate to the integrity of that structure. There is little redundancy, no backup plan when the primary system fails. This technological fragility was compounded by social and political fragility. Maintaining these mega-projects required a stable, resource-rich authority. In times of political decay, economic decline, or war, the meticulous, continuous work of cleaning silt from canals, repairing mortar, and clearing tunnel collapses could be neglected. A small crack left unmended could lead to a catastrophic breach. A single season of deferred maintenance on a Qanat could allow a tunnel to collapse, blocking the flow for an entire community. These historical breakdowns are not mere footnotes, they are essential chapters in the story of innovation. They remind us that engineering is always a dialogue with entropy, a constant fight against decay. The ancients understood this, which is why the role of the water master and the rituals of maintenance were so sacred. A dam was not a one-time achievement, it was a perpetual promise, a covenant that each generation had to renew. When that covenant was broken, whether by natural force, human conflict, or simple neglect, the results were devastating. These cautionary tales ask us a difficult but necessary question. As we build ever more complex systems to support our own civilizations, where have we placed our single points of failure, and what covenants are we prepared to keep to ensure they do not become the source of our own undoing? The desert sun beats down on a field of green, fed by a stream that began its journey before the first stone of Rome was laid. In scattered corners of the world, the past is not a relic under glass, but a living pulse, a technology that has never stopped working. Ancient water systems are not just marvels of history, they are the quiet, beating heart of communities today, a direct line from the ingenuity of our ancestors to the needs of the present. To see them in action is to witness a different kind of time where sustainability is measured not in decades but in millennia. In the rocky valleys of Oman, the Aflaj system continues its ancient rhythm. Here, the term Aflaj refers to the network of Qanats that have sustained life for over 2,500 years. The sound is not of electric pumps, but of water whispering through stone channels, emerging into sunlight to feed date palm groves and small vegetable plots. The knowledge is not locked in a book, but in the hands and minds of the local farmers, the Wali al-Falaj, the water guardian. This person, often elected by the community, walks the length of the channels, checking for cracks or blockages, ensuring the fair distribution of water turns according to a schedule older than most nations. The system operates on pure gravity, requiring no fossil fuels, only vigilance and shared agreement. Its endurance is a testament to a simple, profound efficiency, a partnership with physics that modern engineering often complicates with energy and expense. Across the globe, in the high desert valleys of New Mexico and southern Colorado, a similar story unfolds with a Spanish name, acequia. These community irrigation ditches, brought by colonists from North Africa via Spain, are far more than watercourses. They are democratic institutions. The water flowing in an acequia is considered a communal resource, owned not by individuals, but by the association of farmers, the Persians. They gather for annual meetings to elect a mayordomo, a ditch manager, and vote on maintenance, water allocation, and rules. When a spring cleaning of the ditch is called, every member shows up with shovels, not because a government agency ordered it, but because their shared survival depends on it. This is water management as a social contract, written not on paper, but in the collective memory and mutual obligation of neighbors. Why have these specific systems persisted while grand aqueducts fell silent? The answer lies in their design philosophy. They are decentralized, resilient, and deeply embedded in the social fabric. They do not create a single point of failure. If one channel of an afflage or acequia is damaged, the rest of the network can often function. They are managed at the local level by the people who depend on them most directly, creating a powerful incentive for care and fair use. Furthermore, these systems often support remarkable biodiversity. The acequias in New Mexico are linear oases, their banks supporting willows and cottonwoods that provide habitat for birds and insects, creating cool microclimates in the arid landscape. The slow seepage from the channels recharges groundwater, benefiting the entire local watershed. This is not just irrigation, it is ecosystem stewardship, a recognition that bringing water to a field should also nurture the land around it. To speak to a farmer tending his share of an acequia, or to a wali al-falaj measuring a water turn with a notched stick and the shadow of a mountain, is to encounter a living library. Their knowledge is practical, tactile, and irreplaceable. They can read the health of the system in the clarity of the water, the dampness of the soil beside a channel, or the vigor of the crops. This is the ultimate test of any technology, not how impressive it looks in a moment of triumph, but how well it serves life year after year, century after century. These living traditions offer more than a nostalgic connection to the past. They provide real-world models for integrated water management. In an age of depleted aquifers and energy-intensive desalination plants, they remind us of the elegance of gravity, the wisdom of local governance, and the value of designing systems that work with both the ecology and the community. They prove that the most advanced solution is sometimes the one that has already been answering the question for 1,000 years, quietly, reliably, and with a deep respect for the balance of the world it sustains. This enduring success forces a question about our own modern infrastructure, built for scale and control. What might we learn if we listened to the quiet wisdom of these ancient, still-flowing streams? A structure's purpose does not end when its last channel runs dry. Long after the societies that built them had faded into history, their monumental waterworks remained, silent and immense, posing a profound question to every new generation that encountered them. Without the original blueprint or the living memory of their function, how do you explain the impossible? You reach for the language of myth. In medieval Europe, the soaring stone arcades of Roman aqueducts, still striding across the countryside, were widely believed to be the work of giants or a lost race of superhuman beings. This was not ignorance but a form of sense-making. Faced with a scale of engineering that seemed beyond human capability, the cultural memory transformed the Roman engineer into a figure of legend, a way to contain the awe these ruins inspired. The structures themselves were often repurposed, their stone carefully quarried to build new symbols of faith, like the cathedrals and fortresses of the Middle Ages. The aqueduct's original meaning was erased, but its physical material was woven into a new story, its stones becoming literal building blocks for a different civilization's identity. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, a different thread of memory was being actively preserved and expanded. Scholars and engineers in centers like Baghdad and Cordoba did not see the ancient Persian Qanats or Roman hydraulic texts as relics of giants, but as a vital inheritance of knowledge. They meticulously translated and studied Greek and Persian texts on water management, integrating this wisdom with their own observations and innovations. They perfected the Noria advanced canal systems and wrote detailed treatises on hydrology. For them, cultural memory was not myth, but a living library, a continuum of learning where the past was a foundation to be built upon, not a mystery to be feared. This process of reinterpretation reshaped sites in more subtle ways too. In India, as religious practices and political powers shifted over centuries, the function and symbolism of the great stepwells evolved. A valve built primarily for community water collection and social gathering might later have its iconography emphasized or altered to align with new devotional practices, its role as a spiritual sanctuary deepening even as its practical necessity was supplemented by newer technologies. The structure remained, but the stories told about it, the prayers offered within it, changed with the times. This ongoing dialogue between a physical artifact and the cultures that inherit it is a powerful part of its history. The afterlife of these systems reveals that their true impact extends far beyond their original functional lifespan. They become canvases for projection, sources of material, anchors for identity, and catalysts for new knowledge. Our own modern fascination with these places, our framing of them as ancient mysteries or lost technologies, is simply the latest chapter in this long tradition of re-engagement. We approach them now with the tools of archaeology and satellite imaging, yet we are still seeking answers from the silent stone, still trying to bridge the gap between their reality and our understanding. In doing so, we participate in the same timeless human impulse as the medieval farmer who looked up at a Roman arch and saw the hand of a giant. We are building our own story upon theirs, finding in their enduring forms new questions for our own age. The genius of the past was not a single invention, but a shared way of seeing. From the Qanat to the Chinampa, the stepwell to the acequia, a common philosophy emerges, a set of principles that guided hands across continents and centuries. This was not a formal doctrine, but a hydraulic wisdom born from necessity and etched into the landscape itself. The first and most fundamental principle was profound observation. Before any stone was laid, ancient engineers became expert readers of their specific place. They watched where water gathered after a rain, which plants thrived in damp soil, how animals found drink in the dry season. The Nabateans learned the language of flash floods. The Hohokam mapped the gentle slopes of desert rivers. Their technology was not imported, but emerged from a deep, generational conversation with a local ecology. This intimate knowledge led directly to the second principle, the elegant use of gravity. Why fight a force you can employ? From the gentle slope of a Roman aqueduct to the underground river of a Qanat, from the terraced fields of the Andes to the cascading tanks of Sri Lanka, the primary engine was always gravity. It required no fuel, only precise calculation. It moved water silently, reliably, and forever, as long as the source flowed and the channel was clear. This reliance on a natural force demanded systems that were inherently sustainable, aligning human need with planetary physics. Yet, a physical system is nothing without a social one. The third principle was community-based governance. The monumental scale of these works required more than a ruler's decree. It required a shared covenant. We see this in the water judges of Mesopotamia, the elected mayordomos of the acequias, the communal cleaning of the afflage, fair distribution rules, transparent maintenance duties, and collective decision-making turned a water source from a potential source of conflict into a foundation for cooperation. The system's health depended on the health of the social contract around it. The fourth principle was integration. water management was rarely a single-purpose endeavor. A Roman aqueduct supplied fountains, baths, and sewers. An Indian stepwell was a reservoir, a cooling social space, and a temple. A chinampa was a farm plot, a fish habitat, and a water filtration system. By weaving multiple functions, irrigation, sanitation, ritual, commerce into one interconnected design, these societies created efficiency and resilience. The value of the water was multiplied, and its role in daily life was cemented, making its care a cultural imperative, not just a chore. Finally, they built for longevity with local materials. Roman concrete used local volcanic ash. Chinese canals were lined with local clay and bamboo. The Hohokam dug with stone tools into the very earth of their valley. This was not a limitation, but a source of strength. It minimized the energy spent on transport, ensured repairs could be made with at-hand resources, and created solutions that were inherently suited to the regional conditions. Together, these principles form a timeless blueprint. They speak of working with nature, not against it, of distributing control, not centralizing it, of designing for multiple generations, not just the next harvest. In our modern age of concrete megadoms, energy-intensive pumps, and fragile centralized grids, this ancient philosophy asks a quiet, urgent question. We possess vastly more powerful tools, but have we lost sight of these deeper tenets? What if the next leap forward in water security is not a new technology, but a thoughtful return to these old, enduring truths? The shadowy tunnels of the Qanat and the majestic arc of the aqueduct are more than ruins. They are a testament to a fundamental human truth that our greatest achievements are born not in spite of limitation, but because of it. This journey through hydraulic history reveals a story not of isolated genius, but of a universal dialogue, a conversation between human creativity and the unyielding laws of the natural world. We have seen how a single precious drop could shape the soul of a civilization, giving rise to art that mirrored its flow, economies built on its abundance, and spiritual beliefs that honored its sacred essence. These systems were never merely technical. They were the living architecture of society itself, the physical manifestation of cooperation, foresight, and a deep, abiding reverence for the source of all life. Today, we face a world where water is both taken for granted and increasingly scarce, where the scale of our challenges can feel overwhelming. The ancient blueprints we have explored offer no simple, ready-made fix for modern pipes and polluted watersheds. What they provide is something far more valuable, a compass. They point toward principles that transcend time. They remind us that true sustainability is not a product we can install, but a relationship we must cultivate, one built on harmony with natural cycles rather than domination over them. They teach us that equity and clear communal governance are not political ideals separate from engineering. They are the very mortar that holds a water system together across centuries. And they underscore that our most brilliant innovations must be judged not by their immediate power, but by their legacy, by their ability to sustain life for generations we will never meet. This exploration is an invitation to see with new eyes, to look at the river not just as a resource but as a partner, to view the landscape not as a blank slate but as a teacher, holding ancient lessons in its contours and dry riverbeds. The value of water is not measured in price, but in the culture it nourishes, the cooperation it demands, and the future it makes possible. Let the quiet persistence of a still-flowing afflage or the serene geometry of a forgotten stepwell inspire not just wonder but action. In every choice we make about this vital resource, we are writing our own chapter in this long, human story. Will we build with the wisdom of those who came before, who understood that to manage water is ultimately to steward the future? If this journey through the mysteries of our hydraulic past resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more explorations into the forgotten foundations of our world. And we would love to hear from you. Which of these ancient systems left you most in awe? Share your thoughts in the comments below.